Statcast has a new metric known as miss distance, and it does a great job of giving us some new information as to how pitchers are missing bats. Before we get into some of the visuals that Baseball Savant has actually published and their leaderboards, I'm going to break this down for you in the way that I've kind of interpreted it. And the best way to do that is just to look at a swing. So here's Jarren Duran swinging through a Luke Weaver changeup from a couple years ago. The way that they're measuring miss distance is essentially in the 4 cardinal directions. So you have north-south miss, and then you have the east-west miss. And they've changed the term slightly. So this is a really good example of 2 kinds of misses, but the first one is pretty obvious. He's swinging above the ball, right? So this is an over swing. He's over. So there'll be a stat we'll see that's the percent of a hitter's swings or a pitcher's swings that are over the baseball, most common on breaking balls and things that break downward. If Jarren Duran's bat was underneath this baseball, so imagine if the baseball was up at Austin Wells' mask, this would be an underswing. Those are pretty intuitive. That's your north-south miss. Then you have your east-west miss, which is essentially if the ball was up in on the barrel or inside on the handle, let's say more so than the barrel. This would be a tied-up miss. And then you have a flail miss, which is also present in this, where it almost seems like the ball is somewhat beyond the bat head, so to speak, to the point where you literally can't even contact the ball if you were to move the barrel up and down. Then you also have a subtle timing one that I call it more so. Those are timing misses right there. But if you think of it from this direction, you then have what is just literally early and late. We also have a percent on that. So I like this one just because it's very intuitive. This one early late makes a lot of sense. This is a home run from Ohtani. He's obviously timed up here pretty perfectly. He's catching the ball out in front. If the ball was like here and Ohtani was swinging here, then he would obviously be very early. And if his barrel was back here and the ball was almost past him, then you would obviously be running into a late swing. So pretty intuitive in all of those. And as we dig into the actual leaderboard, it's not totally surprising, and this is how MLB's marketed it, which is smart. The average miss distance, that's the largest in baseball, is Mason Miller's slider. Not entirely surprising. He's an incredible pitcher. That's an incredible pitch. But I also like just sorting through and looking at, okay, that over we're talking about, right? You see a lot of breaking balls here. Chase Burns is up top, Caleb Killian, Nolan McLean, Mason Miller. This is the most common miss is over. So how many swings from hitters are over these particular pitch types? Chase Burns obviously up there. Then lined up is the perfectly one. So these are not over under. This is like literal barrel accuracy to some extent on a given pitch type. Again, we're looking on a pitcher level. Tomoyuki Sugano, everyone is lining up that pitch. There's a bunch of sinkers here. A lot of slower pitchers too, like Bailey Ober doesn't throw too hard. Rhett Lauder's a little bit low velo. Zach Gallen's changeup obviously getting lined up pretty nicely. You also have under as well. This is where it starts to make a bit more sense that we're turning towards four-seam fastballs. Juan Duran's is sick. There's a couple Guardians you'll see scattered throughout this, which is perhaps something that they prize. They like that like big vertical break, extension-y kind of four-seam fastball. Devin Williams, under a lot, but I almost wonder if that's because guys are gearing up for the changeup specifically, of which his is really good. But this makes a lot of sense, and I do think that one of the things I liked was just looking at this, which is, yeah, bigger misses are generally good. It's not totally surprising. It also depends somewhat on the intent of the pitcher and the pitch that's being thrown, but Mike Petriello had this really good chart that just rips through, okay, sliders only last year, you can see as you run into the biggest misses to the smallest misses, and I just look at the slug line here, like you're basically losing, what is it, like 70 or so, 80 or so points a slug as you don't miss the bat by as much. So that makes a ton of sense to me. I think it's somewhat intuitive in a lot of respects that we jump through here. But I also want to point out, this is partially why the league is pushed, I think, towards bigger shapes, because they induce more miss, more frequent miss. And despite the fact that hitters are getting better against sweepers, I love this angle, and I think we need more of this in broadcasts. But this is a great example. I'll play it full speed once for you here. This is an Ohtani sweeper. I mean, come on. That thing just takes off laterally. It almost like lifts and moves to the glove side, which is pretty common among a lot of these like seam shifted sweepers that we're seeing. This is, to me, like if you were to tell someone like, why are guys throwing sweepers? And I know Ohtani's is a very good one, but these hard sweepers are often the ones that net out to be the best. This is why. Like that thing takes off laterally and up, and it's impossible to hit, and it creates oftentimes some of the biggest misses in baseball. If you go back to this chart that we were just looking at and try to find average miss distance, all of these are breaking balls. Like you have to sort this out, probably go maybe like 200 deep before you hit a fastball of any kind. All of these in this pitch type column here. There you go. Cameron Majinski's sinker is the most missed not fastball, it seems, relative to all the other breaking balls. But this makes a lot of sense. Like we're proving this out in a lot of ways as to why pitchers are moving off four-seam fastballs, but this is a good example. And again, I just love watching Ohtani do anything with the baseball. So anyways, it also allows us to kind of confirm this idea that hitters gear up for fastball and adjust to everything else. Now, I do think in the modern age of stats, that perhaps the reason a lot of people get frustrated with it from an old school standpoint is it's like confirming things that we already knew, if that makes any sense. This was the whole seam shifted way thing. If you ask scouts a while back, hey, does this guy's ball move late? They would say, I think it has late life. And then the data people would be like, no, there's no such thing as late life. But then we come to know that, yeah, perhaps balls do move differently in flight based on how the seams are interacting with the air. I think it applies to fastballs as well. And this timing idea of like hitters continually saying that they're sitting fastball and adjusting to breaking balls. Now we actually have confirmation of that. You'll see, I want you looking at this orange right here, which is the early swing. A lot of the time on anything that is not a fastball or a variant of a fastball, hitters, are early on them because they're geared up for the fastball for the most part. And that makes a lot of sense intuitively. So it's confirming something that we've known for a while from the pitching standpoint, which is that, yeah, hitters are trying to time your fastball. And as a result of that, they generally end up early on some of the better breaking balls or non-fastballs in baseball. Then we go to forcing fastball, flip it a little bit, think about fastballs generally. And we see average miss distance here is pretty interesting. This is what I was talking about with the Guardians. There's a lot of these guys in here. Sobrowski's been unbelievable this year. Tanner Bobby, I wouldn't have guessed, has a big miss. Slade Ciccone, Joey Cantillo there. A lot of Guardians forcing fastballs, which gets at the point that they are an organization that loves that vert. They love gaining velo over time. Effective fastballs, churning out back end starters. They're very good at that. I will point out, too, that the average miss distance here, if you were to look at, I think about the top 15 or so, the average arm angle of it is like 47 degrees, which is above the major league average, which is just below 40 degrees. So it's not totally surprising to me that these guys that are a bit higher slot are the ones that are creating larger miss on their forcing fastballs. You could also look at a guy like Casey Legumina here, who has the largest miss, and he's a bit of a different breed. He's kind of throwing this like low slot righty fastball, which has a lot of arm side movement, but it also has that combo of ride and arm side that allows the pitch to approach the zone pretty flat. And as a result of that, it seems like he gets a lot of swing miss on that offering. And not only just raw swing miss, but the distance of that swing miss is pretty large. I'll also point out Sobrowski's just kind of like a fascinating pitcher. His forcing fastball is sick. This is kind of like a Mason Montgomery clone, which is perhaps the reason why I think a lot of people really liked Mason Montgomery, who got traded from the Rays to the Pirates. But Sobrowski's in a very similar vein. His forcing fastball has, 3.6, almost 4 inches more of that lift and a bit more tail than your average forcing fastball, and it's sitting around better than league average velo for the most part. So that's a fantastic combo, and part of the reason why he's been one of the better relievers in baseball this year. The Guardians pitching lab continues to do pretty incredible stuff in that respect. We could also move from fastballs to some of the non-fastballs here. And I think this is a good way to perhaps create some confirmation bias around like why Andrew Abbott has been so good in his career. I know he's struggled a little bit this season, but if you were to look at ERA minus fifth differentials since, 2023, top right side of your screen here, to Chicago Cubs, which perhaps is a little bit due to maybe some of the wind effects in that park with Assad and Shota, but Andrew Abbott third here, he's almost got a run differential between his ERA and his fielder independent pitching. And he's in a park that is not like Chicago, which is more pitcher friendly. He's in a park that is somewhat insane from a batted ball in the air standpoint and the home runs it allows. So what we're seeing with him, again, flail is off the end of the barrel. He has the highest flail percentage on his changeup. So Guy's barrel does not get to this changeup. The changeup either runs away from the barrel in some capacity, probably against right-handed hitters where he throws that changeup more. But I also think there's some confirmation around here. If you were to look at how he moves down the mound, I think he's fascinating in the respect that he's a little crossfire. So like watch his setup leg there, and then watch where his front foot comes down, which is over. So you run into a bit of like a crossfire delivery with him, despite the fact that he's more of like a vertical fastball guy. Like you see his arm angle there is actually a little high. You know, he's probably like 40 to 45 degrees, not sure off the top of my head. But I don't think intuitively we see a lot of guys who are vertical with this crossfire action. A lot of the crossfire guys I think of are like Ryan Walker, Jake Arrieta, and some of these others, where Abbott seems to have this ability to crossfire and also create vertical break on things. And I don't know, I've just always wondered whether that's a reason why he's been so effective, despite the fact that all of the peripherals say he should mostly regress as a pitcher, which we really haven't seen. But anyways, that's a pretty good way to think about it. Centered changeups, or no, this is not changeups. But and again, the flail percentage here on the changeup is really the thing we're looking at. There's also a lot of very good changeups in here. Tarek Skubal is in here. Andrew Painter's new split, somewhat encouraging. JT Ginn, Max Fried, Griffin Jackson's is a lot of fun. So a lot of these like big running seam shifted changeups are the ones that are obviously creating some more of a flail percentage on that specific changeup, which is important. So as we jump from that, we could also look, this is probably one of the larger takeaways that I found interesting, because I often think of success on pitches, specifically in relation to forcing fastballs from like two components. I think of like the break differential from a vertical drop standpoint, but also just the raw velo differential. I've often thought that some of the best whiff pitches in baseball are ones that are hard relative to the forcing fastball, but create a lot of separation. But that is really hard to do. So it seems like a lot of other pitchers in baseball, especially lefty changeup types, as we see right here with Joey Cantillo, Matthew Boyd, Patrick Corbin, create velocity separation relative to their forcing fastball. And as a result of that, have a higher early swing percentage. So as you can see on this graph, as you go up, you're running into earlier swings, and which is heavily correlated to missed distance, not entirely surprising. But as you go up here, you could also see the velocity gap increases. So there's a decent correlation between, okay, velocity gap to the fastball, larger velocity gap creates a more common early swing pattern. So that's perhaps a way to think about the construction of pitchers generally. And I think that's also where my brain started going on a lot of these metrics, is like, okay, on all these secondary pitch types, if you could create velocity separation, you're generally running into earlier swings. So my brain then went to, how do you become a pitcher that can do everything kind of conjoined into one, if that makes any sense? And I thought there was a really good contrast here between two pitchers, and it would be Jacob Mizorowski and Ranger Suarez. So you can see essentially this is just a velocity band, and I'm removing Mizorowski's curveball a bit, which sits right in this window. So anyways, if you look at Suarez, he has two pitches that create a bunch of early swings. So these are his like timing pitches. This would be his curveball and his changeup. And then you look at the rest of his mix, and it's all like contact-based pitches, relatively good from a timing perspective, but seem to stay off barrel. So you have a cutter, the sinker, and the four-seam fastball. That's a fun mix for a left-handed pitcher to have two timing weapons and a couple contact neutralizers. Then you have Mizorowski, who, again, if you remove this curveball, which isn't really in zone that much, he runs into a really hard slider, an even harder cutter, and then a four-seam fastball, which are all within like this 7 mile/hour gap. And he doesn't really have too much of like the early stuff going on. It seems like he has hitters being late on his slider, which is a bit counterintuitive to a lot of the other sliders we looked at. Tying up on his cutter, which makes a lot of sense, especially being thrown to left-handed hitters. And then the four-seam fastball, guys are obviously under it because it's 100 miles per hour with vertical break from like a 5-foot release. So I think that it's interesting to think of like a Mizorowski if you were to add like a slower breaking ball. I wouldn't say become like a Ranger Suarez, but perhaps become a bit more like an Ohtani, where Ohtani has like that 74 mile per hour curveball he throws. Doesn't zone it a lot, but I wonder if that is a weapon that he could eventually use long term to become more of like what you'd call, I guess, a complete pitcher in a way. But I thought that was interesting. I think it's fun to think about repertoire construction in this sense, where you have basically timing pitches, then you have contact neutralizing pitches. And I think that is perhaps why we've seen the push towards larger mixes across Major League Baseball. That is something that Stephen Nesbitt of The Athletic has had. Lefties in particular are doing this as well, but we also see this with right-handed pitchers too. Everyone's adding a cutter, everyone has a sinker, even if you have an efficient forcing fastball. And as a result of that, they're becoming more successful pitchers. And I wonder if we're confirming that to some extent through what we're understanding here. You just have more ways to miss the barrel. That's probably why I find it so impressive that certain guys are able to miss barrel and be really effective with consolidated mixes. That idea of mixed expansion also relates to the three-fastball approach, which we've seen a ton of. Chad Patrick is a great example here. He's probably the epitome of it. I know we've used Cam Schlittler and some others, but it's just a great example. He has swings underneath his cutter because that cutter has way more vertical break than average, which you can see right here. The four-seamer ties up lefties. Not totally surprising. It's actually hard a lot of the time for four-seam fastballs that don't have like a ton of cut to tie up hitters. Chad Patrick does that, and then guys are late on his sinker. I'm not sure if this is because it seems to appear like one of the cutter or the four-seam fastball and cause hitters to be late. But this is like the three-fastball approach, and I love the fact that he's basically mistiming hitters in a couple ways. He's getting underswings, he's getting guys to tie up, and he's getting guys to be late on his sinker in particular. So that's a lot of like the pitching side of things. Hopefully that makes a lot of sense in terms of how they're breaking it down. There's also a flip to the hitting side. I'm not going to dig too far into this overall, but I did find it interesting that there are a couple guys who consistently are early. Cam Smith is a fascinating one where he's way early on off speed and breaking balls. And as a result of that, he's running into this thing where he has like a really high barrel rate, and he's actually been pretty good against fastballs in particular, but it seems like he's a guy that's just literally gearing for forcing fastballs and it doesn't really matter. That's actually an effective approach for a lot of guys. If you look at just like the average miss distance, you'll run into some guys who are pretty good hitters. Bryce Harper's pretty good. Okamoto's been really good as well. Paul Goldschmidt in his late career has not been as great. but Christian Walker's been a good hitter this year. A lot of other struggling guys mixed in some capacity here. It's fascinating that the best hitters in baseball are not the ones that like prevent early or late swings. It's actually the ones that just destroy fastballs. And it seems like perhaps as a methodology, selling out for four-seam fastballs isn't a bad idea. A lot of like the super high perfect contact guys. It's kind of funny that Brian Hayes is on perfect contact. I also think he's up there. Yeah, he's up there for on time versus fastballs as well. So that's a great example of like a path problem, perhaps, where his timing is perfectly fine, but his path is off to the point where he hits everything on the ground and can't pull anything. Whereas like a Cam Smith's the complete opposite, where he lifts and hits everything beautifully, but it seems like perhaps he has some timing issues with some of the non-fastballs that he's seeing, which is why he sees so many breaking balls. A lot of data in here, a lot of fun to dig through. Hope this video was somewhat informative in getting you into these leaderboards and digging around more. But I enjoy this stuff. I always appreciate when Statcast puts stuff like this out. I figured to give you guys a quick video just digging through it. As always, take care and I'll see you soon.